My name's Brendan Nicholson. I work for ASPI's strategist site. And I'm just here to introduce Associate Professor Meg Keane, who's a Senior Policy Fellow at the College of Asia and the Pacific at the ANU. And Meg is going to reveal all about the Pacific.
Do you have a couple days as I begin here? I think it's probably appropriate. I know this morning you've been getting a lot about frameworks and core issues affecting our strategic interests. And the South Pacific probably doesn't get enough attention sometimes, and yet, if you look at the Defense White Paper, it's given primary importance, second only to defending our own borders, this near region of the South Pacific area. If you look at our aid program, it's where we spend our most money. And if you listen to our Foreign Affairs Minister, although one talks a lot about China, Indonesia, and other places in the region, the South Pacific is often forefront at our minds because it affects regional stability. I think you've seen many photos of transport routes. You want to export and import using the oceans out of Australia, and inevitably you're going to go through one of these little Pacific Island country territories. So rules-based orders, the things you would have heard about, I imagine, this morning, security, stability, matters in this region. And furthermore, it isn't dependent, our interest, on strategic turns or pivots. We are here, we're not going to exit from our neighborhood. This is an enduring relationship and one which will persist in the long term. So it's one that we are in for the long haul, and the expectations of our allies and those that have territories in this region are that we will play a leadership role. So what I want to do in the time that's available is, and please give me some timing indicators, in the 30 minutes that I have, is quickly just review the Defense White Paper and the importance it places on the Pacific Island countries. And one would expect that might well be reflected also when the White Paper on Foreign Affairs comes out. I then want to look a little bit at the geopolitics, which you would have been hearing about this morning, but how does it affect this little region, or big region with little islands? But also that this is not a passive region. It is going out and courting international players. And that has an impact on our influence. It has an impact on how we are going to engage in the long term in this region and the way in which that relationship will have to mature. I also want to have a quick look at resource and environment security, because these little island countries have narrow economies, most of which are reliant in one way or another on a few resources. And so that becomes important. All of you would have heard of climate change pressures on these small countries. Of the 20 most vulnerable countries, at least 8 are in our region, and the most vulnerable sits there, Vanuatu. And we are the first responder. So that has implications for preparedness and our engagement. Finally, time permitting, I'll look at a few of the changes that are happening inside these countries that are important for Australia to understand, that probably haven't been getting the kind of attention they deserve, but also impact on stabilization in the region. I don't usually sort of use slides down here, but I can't see it. A map is really important to understanding our strategic interests in this region, and it's also a good way to know where you are. There's 22 independent states and territories in this region, so a lot of different independent players. If you have a look at this, you see that the area is huge. Look at the size of Australia, look at this area. It's about the size of Africa if you take in the watery zones. That's an important point. 90% of this area is blue. It's maritime. Maritime security in this region is going to become of increasing importance to us as well as to it. It is the richest tuna fishing ground in the world. The little 8 countries that have the richest fishing ground supply about 35% of the tuna globally. If you took in the whole Western and Central Pacific, of which this is part, along with Asia, you're talking about 60% of tuna. Tuna is going to become scarce elsewhere. So external players, foreign fishers, distant water fishing nations are going to be more active in these waters. And we already know there's a high level of transnational crime and rising. So if we aren't involved in this, with their 22 patrol boats, which are on the water about 50 days out of a year, this is going to be a region that is undergoverned, to say the least. You can also see our long boundaries or borders with this area. They're fairly porous. It's important for us to know what's going on in this region. The other thing to note is the huge variation and diversity. A one-size-fits-all sort of approach to the South Pacific isn't going to be a big success. You have countries of 10,000 people, Nauru and Tuvalu, so going to be totally unviable economically now and in the long term. And then you have countries like Papua New Guinea growing very rapidly at 8 million, very rich in resources. Here's one of the paradoxes of the Pacific. The more rich you are in resources, the poorer you do on your development indicators. So often, instability and problems are associated with not having enough resources. Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands are probably the more resource wealthy, and yet they're off track on just about every development indicator. A reminder of the Defense White Paper. It bears reading the first bit of it, which deals with the South Pacific. Our second strategic defense interest is in our secure near region. So that's Indonesia as well, but it's all this South Pacific and Timor-Leste, but it's also the whole South Pacific. And the concern in the South Pacific is the fragility of these governments. It's prone to political volatility. I think particularly in Melanesia, inequality is growing, not diminishing. That is not good for stability. You have rapid population growth. I want to say more about that a little bit later. It's not just the population is growing, it's that demography is changing, and that has stability implications. We spend a lot of money trying to keep this area stable. So Ramsey, which many of you are familiar with, the regional assistant mission to Solomon Islands, we spent at least $2.7 billion. You don't make that kind of investment and walk away. You try and maintain it and secure the benefits that it has achieved. And Ramsey has achieved many benefits. We've talked about a rule-based order, important in maritime environments, but not just on the seas. We care about if weak governments ends up encouraging money laundering, illegal movements of goods and services and people. That's of concern to us, and we want to minimize it. So we will be engaged in this region. Regionalism is important. You saw that huge area. It's not just us active in this region. We are there with our other partners. ANZUS, the North, United States has the North Pacific territories. French have the French territories. New Zealand's highly engaged in this region. But it's not just ANZUS, as we'll see. There's a number of other external players active in the region. So regionalism is going to get harder for us because we do play the lead role, and it's going to be more complicated, and we're going to be coordinating and engaging with more and different players than we have in the past in this region. And we need to keep an eye on how regional architecture is evolving and changing. It is not static. What worked yesterday may not work well in the future. There are now a number of sub-regional organizations and regional organizations that don't include us. That doesn't mean we don't have influence. It means we might have to be a bit smarter about how we influence the thinking, the analysis, the engagement, the setting of agendas by those organizations. We will be the principal security partner, I think, in this region for a very long time to come. Quite frankly, there's not a lot of competition to take the lead role. But it doesn't mean, as I've said earlier, that that job isn't going to get harder, particularly as maritime security becomes a bit more tricky, and with climate change, we get more frequent and intense events. When we talk about the region, a lot of concern is often with China in the region, and I think that is being reduced slightly. China is no more engaged in this region than anywhere else in the world, so its escalation has a big impact because these are very small countries. But if you look at it relative to its rising commercial and indeed aid or cooperation in other areas of the world, it certainly is in line and is no more. So of their development assistance, about 4% goes to this region, about 3 times more goes to the Caribbean, for example. That has a lot to do with the size of markets, the populations, the resources in these areas. And it's important to understand the nature of the aid, which is not your OECD DAC kind of assistance. This is from Lowy. They estimate about 80% of assistance that China's given to the region is soft loans. That's a good and a bad. It's this risk and opportunity. Opportunity because this money, this country, so these countries, as Richard Marles has pointed out, are in need of a lot of help, are in need of investment, are in need of financial capital, and the Chinese can bring all that to the region. The problem is when they borrow too much on the understanding or the belief that this debt would be forgiven, and you get debt stress. Places like Tonga that simply can't pay the loans they have taken out. So there's a role for us in working with China and working with the Pacific Island countries about shaping the nature of these interactions so it does boost development prospects, not drag them backwards. We are involved in trilateral aid programs with the Chinese in this region. The advantage of this region is its strategic importance is not as high as, say, the South China Sea, which I'm sure you've heard about or have talked about this morning. So the willingness to engage and collaborate is a little bit higher. You can lay foundations and build relationships in this area that would be more difficult in other areas. Trilateral aid's an example. Defense exercises for humanitarian assistance is another one where we're increasingly able to engage with China. We will not ever dictate how they engage in this region. They have their own approach, but we can help to discuss the impacts, effectiveness, and opportunities. The other thing that one shouldn't mistake is that money doesn't always equal influence. And Australia has some advantages in this region because of its history, because of its people-people relationships, education, trade. A lot of things go into that soft power and influence. And China is still building a lot of that. Anybody who's been involved in defense and have talked to islanders about the defense training that China has offered knows that Australia's defense training is a little bit more popular and more comfortable fit with the forces, the few that exist, and with the people and their culture. One should never think that the islanders are passive. They know very well that people are interested in the resources, are interested in their 12 UN votes, are coming into the region, and they can leverage that interest. This is quite phenomenal for these little island countries. This is just a map of the various diplomatic offices around the world of Fiji, Papua New Guinea, and Solomon Islands. They're growing. And that's because they're trying to tap into aid, trade, and leverage diplomatic relations in places like New York, Geneva, Brussels. They are actively engaging. We saw that with climate change. We're seeing that now with the UN Ocean Summit, which Fiji will co-host. And the Pacific Island Forum is rapidly trying to shape that agenda because it is so important to their strategic interests. If you start to look at where they are active, it's where they already have trade and aid relationships or they would like to boost them. So they are out there with a stronger outward focus and stronger engagement internationally. And that's a role, again, if we are close partners, we're interested in regional stability. How they go about doing that to get the best for their engagement is something we should be thinking about and thinking about what's our role. Particularly, how does our role need to evolve as these countries go from colonies or very dependent countries to ones with more independent policy and wanting to shape the nature of things. We've talked about resource and maritime security. This is an undergoverned region. Australia has very strong expertise in monitoring, surveillance, and indeed is upping its engagement in this region. The place where we really need to think about is you can collect all the data you like, but the islands have never been very good at then using that data for enforcement and analyzing that data. It's a gap that needs to improve significantly. And we should think about what role we could play in boosting that capacity. So the responsiveness, the analysis of data, and this is quite important because this is a valuable area. The most recent statistics out of the Foreign Fisheries Agency that oversees a lot of what goes on in this region is that they're losing about $618 million a year from illegal fishing or unregulated fishing. That's more than what we give to PNG every year in aid, or what we give to the Pacific Island countries minus PNG every year in aid. If we can bring that down, that's significant, particularly if the money is used well, another kind of issue. We don't understand a lot about what goes on in the ecological systems of these areas, but it's going to be important to the future, particularly of the small island states, which do gain considerable revenue from tuna. Climate change and overfishing, but it's pretty sustainably managed, this tuna fishery. What you can see is the stocks are going to go down, particularly where the greatest investment has been in tuna canneries. And with the warming of the ocean, the stocks are going to move westward, out of the area where we have the strongest interest. That's also interesting if you're thinking about where the pressures in the distant water fishing nations may be present in the next 50 or so years. Because these economies are narrow, and this is very well exemplified with PNG, which is by far the most resource rich, they're very vulnerable to external shocks in the system. This is just a huge example of when the LNG project started, PNG had 12% GDP growth. That's bigger than any other country in the world at that time. Pretty surprising. But you take a commodity price dip for LNG and minerals, and you can see, boom, right down to 2%. Revenues are low. The government keeps spending, and particularly at the moment, because we're about to go into an election year. And so what we have is external debt is going up rapidly. We give aid to this country, so we're interested in what's happening to spending. And more is going out the door than is coming in the door. That actually has huge impacts when the spending is also not of a high quality, not particularly integrated or coordinated or strategic, because you get a lot of people, millions of people, where inequality is increasing and services are not reaching them. That's exasperated by internal dynamics. We know that population grows quickly in this region. That's, I think, a pretty well known fact. That's that light blue area. What we've done very little strategic planning for is the fact that their cities are growing at twice the rate of what their populations are growing at. So in a country where I work on urban issues, Honiara, so we put all that money into Ramsey, 4.7 growth in this urban area, this little city. That means the population will double in 16 years. The best government in the world will have trouble managing that kind of growth. And if you're talking about the peri-urban areas, we're talking a doubling time in 6 years. Now, aside from the problems with urban governance, which doesn't really exist in these countries, you recall what's the basis of tensions with land resources. These growth areas are on customary land with unwanted people coming onto them. They're all in unserviced or mostly in unserviced areas. So there's not good drainage. Think of the floods recently we had. There's not sanitation. There is not road networks that bring people into the city. This is a bit of a time bomb if not managed well. And then you dive one layer lower and say, well, who's coming to the cities? This is just a population pyramid. This is the rural areas. Young people, particularly young men, are leaving, not surprising. You want a job, you want education or a modern lifestyle, you go to the city. Because you can't migrate, labor mobility is pretty limited in these places. This is what Honiara looks like. I could do this for Port Moresby, I could do this for Port Vila. A bulge, a youth bulge. There aren't a lot of jobs in this place. If you look at when we've had disturbances in the city, who are the foot soldiers? The young men. They don't start the problems, but they can exasperate them. We've got a young, growing population in most of the Melanesian cities, and they're growing very rapidly. These kids aren't getting a lot of education because that's limited, and in a place like Honiara or Solomon Islands, you can have 6,000 kids graduated and 500 jobs available. So that creates significant pressures. Added to this, because it wouldn't be complete talking about the Pacific without climate change, but not driving problems, adding to pre-existing problems of land, of water, of resources, of increasing population, is climate change. So it's another pressure on an already strained system. The IPCC, which is just the International Panel on Climate Change, the lead scientists, are predicting that these events that you have seen in the news, like Winston, are going to be more frequent and more severe. We can handle one event. We can probably handle 2 events. But what happens if we get a cyclone that hits 3 places at once? We have to work collaboratively with our allies and with others. So you give me a time?
Maybe continue for 5 and then 5 minutes questions.
Yeah, that's easy
Got
where I
such a
am.
steamer.
No, it's all right. I'm actually coming near the end, so that will work me fine. So this is climate change. What happens is there's a rapid response immediately following a disaster, but that can cover very little of the actual costs because these costs go on. The recovery process can go on for 3, 4, 5 years. And that's when people pull out, and either we continue to engage or the recovery is slow. They don't build back better because there isn't the resources often to do so. So the vulnerabilities escalate. You've seen what's happening in the cities. The cities all sit on low-lying areas pretty well. So there is increasing vulnerability in an already strained situation. So we're going to have to think not only about our immediate disaster response, but how do we integrate across the agencies, aid, diplomatic, all sorts of ones, to get a better recovery that won't result, if we don't do it well, in higher costs in the future. So when we're looking at this vast, big area and thinking, well, where are your sources of stability? They're predictable. During political tensions, during regime change, just cast your eye on this. We have a lot of elections coming up, including Fiji, which isn't listed there. We have independence referendums coming up. This is the time when frustrations get vented. And then we've talked about resource tensions, natural disasters, external players playing into the mix. But where I wanted to end is, so where do we see some stability? Where do we see the positives? I've already talked about these sort of diversified regional partnerships, evolving the way we engage in this region to get better outcomes, to involve more players, to make that more strategic and integrated. And we have plenty of examples where it's worked well. We can build on those. Labor mobility, that is important, and we are now realizing that we can keep pumping aid into this area so we can build skills, build the abilities for these people to have income, to invest it in themselves and invest it in economic growth. I just put this up because this is Tonga Samoa. They have a large remittance economy because of their special relationship with New Zealand. 20–30% of their GDP can be from remittances. That goes directly to households, unlike mines and forestry. And then importantly is this connectivity, which is physical, which is the internet. You can see that it's going up, but for this to work well, you've got to use it well. It's got to be able to be used for financial accessibility. It's got to be used to transfer information. It's got to be used for economic growth and moving people around as well as goods with the infrastructure and the road systems. And that is still a challenge, still in need of work. In the end, all these stabilizing factors in our engagement is trying to build a strong future for the kids that live there, but also for ours that are going to live in this region and need stability. So that's a really rapid overview of many countries in a huge region. Thank you.
Right.